Rain swept across the Yorkshire moors in relentless sheets, turning the winding road into a river of blackened earth that clung to Eleanor Fenwick's skirts as she pulled a rattling handcart behind her. Every step sent a cold jolt through her bones, yet she pressed on, driven by the fragile promise of shelter somewhere among the windswept hills. Her parents lay beneath blankets in the cart, their frail bodies trembling with each jolt, the years having taken the strength once so dependable. Eleanor tightened her grip and whispered encouragement, though she doubted they heard her through the roar of the storm. Wind twisted sharply through the heather and nearly sent her to her knees. The handcart lurched, and her mother gasped in pain. Eleanor pushed forward. The lodge was said to stand near a copse of yews, and some villagers whispered that its keeper preferred the company of wolves to men. Yet others said he would never turn away a soul in need. Eleanor clung to that rumor now. Lightning cracked open the sky and illuminated a small stone dwelling tucked against a rise in the hill. Smoke rose from its chimney, curling into the storm-heavy air. Eleanor gathered what little strength remained and pushed the cart toward the door. Rain dripped from her hair as she knocked. Silence answered. She knocked again, her voice breaking as she called out for mercy. The door opened. He was broader than she expected, his frame marked by years of labor and the rumored scars of old battlefields. A low-burning lamp cast warm light across a sharp jaw and eyes that held an unsettling stillness. Eleanor lowered her gaze and murmured, "My old parents cannot walk anymore. Could we stay one night, sir?" Her words dissolved into the rain. Thomas looked past her to the handcart. Something shifted in his expression, not soft sentiment, but a grave understanding. Without a word, he stepped aside. Warm air flooded Eleanor's senses with the scent of wood smoke and simmering broth. She helped her parents toward the hearth as Thomas added logs to the flames. The fire hissed, throwing sparks upward. Eleanor rubbed her parents' hands, coaxing warmth back into their stiff fingers. Thomas ladled broth from a pot and handed it to her, but she asked softly if he might give it to them instead. He obeyed without argument and watched as the old couple drank slowly. Eleanor sat back on her heels, her soaked dress clinging to her legs, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe. Thomas placed a folded wool coat on a chair beside her. He still had not asked her name, nor offered his, and she did not expect him to. Yet something in his silence felt less like distance and more like wary respect. Eleanor's parents soon slept, their breaths slow and even. She rose and thanked Thomas, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded once. She took a seat near the fire, her body heavy, yet her mind flickering with uncertainty. Thomas stood at the opposite side of the hearth, his hands resting against the mantel. He finally asked, his tone respectful but edged with weariness, "How far have you walked?" She answered truthfully, speaking of eviction and debts and neighbors who turned away. He did not interrupt. Outside, the storm grew harsher, wind lashing the shutters. Thunder rolled through the stone walls, but the lodge held firm. Eleanor feared that shelter might last only until dawn. She watched Thomas carefully, unsure whether he would regret his mercy. Thomas straightened and said, "The road will not clear by morning. You and your parents will stay until it is safe to travel." His voice held the weight of a vow. Eleanor bowed her head, tears slipping down her cheeks, though she wiped them away quickly. Thomas glanced at her parents, then at the handcart by the door. "No one should be left to such hardship," he said. Eleanor wondered what ghost lingered behind his measured words, but she asked nothing. Tonight was not a night for pasts, only survival. Eleanor had once walked these moors when her parents were strong and her future seemed bright. The memory cut at her, yet it fueled her resolve. She would not allow despair to claim them. For a moment, her gaze drifted to Thomas. His brow was furrowed in a concentration she could not decipher. He moved with a soldier's precision, and she found herself wondering what losses he carried in silence. It struck her that she did not know what compelled him to open his door at all. She had seen men step aside in marketplaces rather than help her lift her mother into a cart. She had heard whispers that a widow, without property, was little more than a burden to society. Yet here stood a man who offered warmth without asking for repayment. Kindness was a language she had heard rarely since her husband's passing. But here, in the flickering glow of unfamiliar shelter, she felt a belief return, fragile but living. A branch snapped outside, carried by the wind, and Thomas turned his head sharply. For a second she glimpsed the soldier he once had been. Then his posture eased. "You are safe here," he said, not looking at her, yet meaning every word. And as Eleanor listened to the storm batter the world beyond those stone walls, she understood that for this night, at least, he spoke the truth. The firelight steadied her breathing, and she felt the possibility of rest. Warmth settled quietly. Dawn emerged pale and uncertain across the moors, the storm having left the earth bruised and heavy with mist. In the quiet lodge, Eleanor woke before the embers dulled, gently adjusting the blankets around her parents. Their rest remained uneasy, but their breathing held a steadiness she had feared lost. She rose carefully, hoping not to disturb Thomas. Yet she found him already awake, boots laced, coat on, preparing to step into the bitter morning air. He paused when she turned. They regarded one another in silence, neither accustomed to conversation at daybreak. At last, she offered a small nod. He answered with one of his own and left to fetch water from the stream swollen by the storm. Eleanor fed the fire and surveyed the modest kitchen. She had lived in finer homes once, but she saw more dignity in this humble shelter than in any estate that lacked human mercy. She found barley in a tin, onions stored cool against the stones, and a piece of salt pork suspended from a hook. She began a slow, fragrant broth. The warmth filled the air before Thomas returned, his coat glistening with dew. He paused near the door, as though uncertain he should enter while she worked, but she welcomed him inside with a gesture toward the steaming pot. Wind clung to him like another garment, and he stayed near the hearth until his breath no longer fogged. Her parents stirred when Thomas brought bowls of broth, and her father murmured in gratitude, though his voice faltered with weakness. Eleanor felt relief settle through her like warm iron. After they ate, Thomas inspected the doorframe, checking for damage from the night's gale. Eleanor approached, compelled to speak though unsure what words belonged between them. "You have given us what few would," she said softly. He did not answer at once, only kept his eyes on the door before replying. No one should need to beg for shelter. The simplicity carried more weight than any oath. For 2 days the roads remained drowned beneath waters that churned with uprooted branches and sodden peat. Eleanor helped Thomas with what small tasks she could manage. She repaired a tear in one of his coats while he chopped firewood, her stitches neat and measured. When she handed the coat back, he regarded the mended seam and said, "You are skilled." The compliment unsettled her. Praise had become a stranger since the world reduced her to a widow of little worth. She thanked him and returned to her chores to quiet the unexpected flutter beneath her ribs. Yet the moor did not exist without watchful eyes. A shepherd passing near the lodge saw Eleanor beside Thomas as they filled water pails. By evening the whispers began in the village public house, how a widow of uncertain virtue had found refuge beneath the roof of a man who lived alone. No one spoke her name at first, but by the second day they did. The innkeeper's wife declared that desperation bred impropriety quicker than hunger, and another swore she saw Eleanor leaning too close to the gamekeeper, though she had never left her own hearth that morning. Eleanor sensed the tension before she heard the words. She felt it in Thomas's wary glance as he secured the latch that evening, in the pause before he banked the fire, as though expecting an unwelcome rider. When she asked what troubled him, he considered withholding his thoughts, but candor prevailed. "Your presence here will be misunderstood." She inhaled sharply, though she had known. Reputation, once bruised, rarely healed, especially for a woman without a husband to shield her. She straightened her shoulders and replied, "We had nowhere else. Whatever is spoken beyond these walls cannot alter that truth." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. The next morning, Thomas rode to a nearby trading post to procure additional supplies. When he returned, his expression confirmed what she feared, that rumors had grown bold. He set down the parcels and spoke in a measured tone. They believe we conduct ourselves without honor. Eleanor's face warmed with shame, though she had earned none of it. She folded a wool blanket and held it tightly in her grasp before answering, "I will go when the road reopens." Thomas looked at her then, truly looked, with an intensity she had not expected. "You intend to drag a cart through mire again? To the poorhouse, perhaps? Or to another door that may not open?" The words struck deep. She could neither deny his reasoning nor welcome the reminder of her family's precarious state. She turned away, but he remained still, his silence stretched thin between them. That night, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep. She rose and mended one of her father's shirts by dim firelight. Thomas, who slept lightly, noticed and approached quietly so as not to startle her. "The roads will clear," he said. She nodded, though she did not feel certainty in the promise. Thomas rested a hand on the back of a chair, but did not sit. At length he spoke again, his voice lower, more deliberate. "While you remain, you're not a guest only. This is your home as well, for however long Providence keeps you here." The words nearly unraveled her composure. She bowed her head, acknowledging a kindness she scarcely knew how to hold. Her reply came faint, as though carried from a distant part of herself. "You give more than you realize." Morning brought cold sunlight that glittered along the sodden earth, though the waters still blocked the road. Eleanor prepared oatcakes. Thomas mended a latch that creaked in the wind. The world outside continued its endless judgment, but inside the lodge, a quiet understanding rooted itself, fragile yet undeniable. As the day waned, Thomas stepped outside to assess the river's level. Eleanor watched from the doorway, her heart a tempest no calmer than the storm that first brought her here. When he returned, wet from the grass, he met her gaze and spoke with solemn clarity. "When the path clears, you must choose whether to leave this place or remain. I would not have you stay out of despair, but through your own will." Eleanor felt the moment imprint itself upon her. Her voice did not tremble when she answered, "I will decide with a clear mind." Neither said more. Yet as night settled over the moors, both carried the knowledge that the world outside waited to claim them again, and nothing remained simple. The lodge seemed warmer than it had before, and far quieter. A tension lingered in the air, neither burden nor comfort, but something perilously between. And though neither of them dared speak it, the choice approaching would redefine all that followed. The wind shifted on the third morning, carrying with it the scent of thawed earth and distant heather, a sign that the waters on the road had begun to recede. Eleanor stood outside the lodge, her shawl drawn tight, watching the fog lift to reveal a narrow stretch of passable ground. The realization struck her with both relief and dread. Safety no longer held her captive. Choice did. Her parents dozed by the fire inside, looking stronger than they had in weeks. The knowledge that they might travel again should have filled her with joy, yet her heart faltered, unsettled by the question Thomas had asked her. Would she remain or resume a life of uncertainty? When she stepped back through the doorway, she found Thomas at the table, inspecting a map that showed the nearest parishes, mill roads, and the poorhouse she wished never to see. He did not look up until she spoke. "The road is opening," she said. He studied her face before responding, "Yes." The single word held no triumph, only quiet resignation, as though he had known from the moment he first led her in that this hour would arrive. She approached the table, her fingers trembling against the wood. "I'm grateful beyond measure," she said, "for what you have done." Thomas folded the map slowly, as if it were capable of wounding him. "Gratitude," he answered, "is not the only language I hope we might share." The statement hung between them, too intimate to ignore. Eleanor struggled for breath, for footing, for honesty. "I do not know what I'm allowed to feel," she whispered. "The world has rules, and I have broken enough simply by remaining." Thomas stepped toward her, though only by the smallest margin, as if wary of overwhelming her. "If the world condemns mercy," he murmured, "then I have no desire to walk in step with it." Before she could reply, hoofbeats echoed through the valley. A rider approached the lodge, the same land agent who had evicted her family. He dismounted, boots striking the earth with cruel precision. Thomas moved instinctively in front of Eleanor. The agent removed his gloves and said, "You harbor paupers, Mr. Reeve. The parish committee demands their removal." Eleanor's stomach clenched, but she stood firm. Thomas answered, "They are under my protection." The man laughed dryly. "Protection? A widow living beneath a bachelor's roof. Your reputation is already ash. The parish will not be responsible for the scandal you invite." Eleanor felt humiliation claw up her spine. She raised her chin, refusing to break. "My parents are not burdens," she said. "They are human souls." The agent turned his gaze upon her, lips curled. "Souls, perhaps, but costly ones. You would have done better marrying again instead of letting your virtue spoil." Thomas's fist tightened. "You will leave now," he warned. The agent mounted his horse and spat into the mud. "If they are not removed by week's end, the magistrate will see to it himself." When he rode away, Eleanor exhaled shakily. She moved toward her parents, but Thomas stopped her with a quiet, urgent voice. "You will not suffer such treatment again," he said. She searched his expression for arrogance or pity and found neither. Only conviction. "The law is not ours to command," she said. Thomas answered, "No, but courage can command the law's regard." He looked toward Whitby, toward the manor that governed so many fates, and squared his shoulders. "I will speak to Lord Braxton. I will tell him I intend to wed you." The world stilled. Eleanor reached for the nearest chair. "You scarcely know me." Thomas shook his head. "I know enough. I know how you place others before yourself, though you have little left to give. I know you have walked through rain rather than abandon duty. And I know that if you leave, the moors will become as empty as they were before you arrived." Her pulse thundered. Marriage must be chosen by two hearts, not forced by circumstance. He met her gaze with steady warmth. "Then choose," he said, "not for shelter, for life." The words tore through her defenses. She turned away, tears rising without permission. "I am afraid," she confessed. "I have lost too many things I loved. I cannot bear another grief." Thomas's voice softened, "Then allow joy at least a chance to fight for you." He saddled his horse and set off for Braxton Hall. Eleanor watched him disappear across the moor, fear and hope warring within her chest. Hours passed before he returned, weary but unbroken. He stepped inside, breath visible in the cold. "I spoke as I promised," he said. "Lord Braxton does not approve, but he will not interfere. He respects a man who stands by his word." Eleanor covered her mouth with shaking fingers. Thomas took a careful step toward her. "No one can decide your future but you. If you wish to leave, I will secure a wagon, provisions, and a place for you in the next parish. But if you wish to remain, you will do so not as a guest, nor a roomer, but as the woman beside me." Silence filled the room, deep and steady. At last, Eleanor walked to her parents. Her mother's fragile hand curled around hers, as if urging her not to run from happiness. Eleanor turned back to Thomas, her heart opening like the first wildflower after frost. "I choose to remain," she said. Thomas closed his eyes for a brief, reverent moment, as though offering thanks no words could carry. When he looked at her again, warmth flickered in his gaze like fire catching fresh kindling. "Then we will face whatever comes," he said, "not as two, but as one." Outside, the sky cleared fully, revealing moors washed clean by the storm. And though the world beyond their door still held whispers sharp as thorns, a new truth had taken root. Love, once given shelter, refuses to be turned away.